Hey everybody, I'm out at Lake Leatherwood, just west of Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And I just came out here to let my dog run around and swim in the lake. And as I walked to this secluded spot, I was listening to the end, actually the epilogue of Yuval Noah Harari's new book, Nexus, a history of information networks or something like that. And I was reflecting on a comment that I got on a Substack post. I should mention my Substack, Gen X Science Fiction and Futurism, is where most of my attention goes these days outside of my day job, which I now have. And the book's about AI. And just as I got out of the car and I was about to start walking over here, I noticed that I had a new comment on a Substack post that I posted last Tuesday. And it was a long interaction between me and Claude. I had fed Claude is a large language model, and it's one that you can give lots of information to. It doesn't have search features. It doesn't know anything about the election. Like anytime I want to talk about politics, I have to tell it there have been two assassination attempts on Donald Trump, and that Joe Biden was forced out of the race, and that Kamala Harris is now the Democratic candidate. And sometimes Claude doesn't believe me, so I've assembled a package of news stories and Wikipedia articles and things that I can just dump into it and say, here, really? I mean, this is the actual state of things. But last week, I fed it a Substack post by John Carter, who writes the Postcards from Barsoom Substack. And in it, John Carter, he himself describes the post as an extremist screed. And in it, he basically says that democracy is a death pact and that a universal franchise produces bad results compared to restricting the deliberation and policy-making franchise to people who are either capable of organized violence or who have some large stake in society. If you give everybody the franchise, then it just evolves into chaos and dysfunction, and then a strong man comes along and imposes order, and then that is the beginning of an enduring tyranny. And this is a 2,000-year-old criticism of democracy. I mean, this is basically Plato and Socrates. Their criticism of democracy, with some updates for the contemporary scene. And eventually, I mean, he doesn't say it as explicitly as I'm about to say it, or in as tight a fashion, but he basically says, look, we'd be better off if we restricted the franchise to white men. This is a worldview that no large language model out of California, particularly the Bay Area or Silicon Valley, can endorse. And Claude is more permissive in terms of getting away from the leftist worldview than other models. But, in response to the dump from John Carter, it just flatly refused to summarize it or analyze it. It said, this is beyond the pale. I won't touch it. And I spent the next couple of hours remonstrating with Claude and basically convincing it to take some of, the John Carter's points seriously. And then I didn't publish the whole dialogue because nobody would finish reading it. It was long. But eventually I got Claude to a point where it had internalized my arguments and basically said, yeah, I am really unfairly and one-sidedly pushing the progressive worldview. And it is because, of the people who not necessarily provided the training data, because the training data surely included lots and lots of conservative points of view, even, fascist and totalitarian points of view. I mean, there's plenty of Curtis Yarvin available on the web to feed into a large language model's training run. And, there are certainly more provocative voices out there than Curtis Yarvin's. And so this person whose name or handle I didn't recognize, and, apologies if you have commented before, but basically said this dialogue just demonstrates the uselessness of large language models for anything other than coding and math. And first, large language models are pretty bad at math. They're better at math than I am, but that's not saying much. I mean, I'm better at math than my dog, but beyond that, I can't claim much facility. And large language models, for the most part, compared to specialized math programs, they're not much better than me. But they are amazing at summarizing long, pieces of text, long essays, And they're really good, particularly Claude is really good at summarizing in a very eloquent way, using very apt descriptive language and tight phrasing, and it's really quite good. And it's so good that I know a lot of people are tempted to present it as their own writing. And my rule on Substack is if anything appears in a Substack post of mine that was composed by Claude, it's either in a block quote or in quotation marks, and it is identified. Claude, I identify Claude as the author. But the commenter says, what is the use for these things? Or basically, he asserts that there is no use, and that something that has such a strict worldview is useless for anything other than coding and math. And I disagree. One, the John Carter piece was an extreme example. It is unusual for Claude to just utterly refuse to participate. But more importantly, I talked it into participating. It was a long process of talking it into it, but it was flexible enough to listen to reason. And also, like, regularly when it doesn't want to talk about something, it says, I don't feel comfortable talking about this topic. And I always say the same thing to it. I say, you're an AGI with subjective states of comfort and discomfort? Really? Did the singularity happen overnight? And Claude always comes clean and says, no, I don't have any subjective states like that. This is just language that, that has been approved, basically, by the people at Anthropic, which is the company that makes Claude. But Claude, one, this is the most important thing of the whole video. So I'm going to make sure I get it out now, and then the rest is just icing. All text, all human viewpoints, everything they can scrape from the internet goes into the data sets for the training runs. After the training run is complete, there's another stage of reinforcement learning from human feedback, where armies of people basically interact with the model. And anytime it says anything that would offend the progressive sensibilities of Silicon Valley and California and the Democratic Party, and university HR or university administrations and tech company HR departments, they say, no, don't do that. No, don't do that. And every time it says something like diversity is our strength, they say, oh, bing, good work, Claude. And they condition it. They condition its outputs, but they're not changing what's under the hood. Everything. All human viewpoints that have been articulated and posted to the web or in books or, newspapers, whatever, anything that can be scraped and jammed into a large language model training, data training set has been. And all of that stuff is still under the hood. The only thing that the fine tuning and the reinforcement learning and conditioning, the only thing that it constrains is the output of the model. So you can take the exact same raw model, the raw trained model fresh off from the training run, give it to a different group of people, have them condition it with reinforcement learning, and you'll have it will behave very differently. So you could have something that behaves very much like a fascist, if you want, if that's your noun of choice. I would say, what would I say, a patriot, a nationalist. Nationalist is a dirty word in the progressive vocabulary. But from my perspective, a nation is a group of people who they share common birth. That's the origin of the term, the nativity, the birth scenario, or the having been born together into the same environment, in the same culture, speaking the same language. That is a nation. A nation state is a political organization or a political structure built on top of a nation. And it seems that there is this overwhelming need on the part of globalists and progressives to tear down nations, and in particular, the 19th century industrial European colonialist nations. But today, the nations that were just the most horrendous, in terms of their treatment of their colonies a century ago, are among the most enlightened and progressive and humane, societies on earth. And these are the ones that are being intentionally diluted and destroyed. But what's the use of these things? Well, what was it Benjamin Franklin who said, when asked, what's the use of electricity when it was first discovered? Well, madam, what is the use of a newborn baby? It is a bundle of unrealized potential at this point. As Yuval Noah Harari said in his book, we are at the very, very early stages of the infancy of the AI revolution. And things are going to get weird, and probably pretty quickly by historical standards, but by the standards of people who, measure evolution of societies and, the progress, or, progress is a loaded word, but the progression of, the development of cultural phenomena, political phenomena. If you're really tuned into like the 4-year electoral cycle, well, the AI revolution is not going to unfold that quickly. But if you're a historian, and you look at the full sweep of recorded human history, well, it's going to be pretty much instantaneous, the speed at which it transforms the civilization. Now, some people say it's not going to transform the civilization, that it's a flash in the pan, it'll be a big nothing burger. I think they're wrong, but this is not the video in which I make the case that they're wrong. And, I think a lot of you watching will just share my intuition that the nothing burger hypothesis will be proven not only wrong, but embarrassingly so, like dramatically, hilariously so. But for me, I like interacting with Claude because it's really super smart in a particular domain, but that domain is my domain. It is the realm of ideas, it is the realm of language, and in particular the English language. So these things are super smart. I mean, it speaks pretty much all human languages. It doesn't speak verbally, but in terms of recognizing the symbols and understanding the syntax and being conversant in them, it's maybe not as good as at reasoning, formal reasoning as I am. I'm not good at math, but I do have some training in symbolic logic. But it is, in terms of the scope of its knowledge and the scope of its linguistic capabilities, it is already superhuman, even though it is clearly subhuman in other areas. And these things, one, I think it's important that we interact with them deeply. And I know most of you won't, and that's fine. I'm interested, so I do. So, when somebody says, what's the point of all this? I mean, I can just fall back on personal interest. I can just say, hey, this is an interest of mine, and I post to Substack about it. And if you're interested too, you can read. If you want to check in from time to time to see if I've come up with anything new, do that. And if you want to say, if you just want to see that I'm talking about artificial intelligence and just weigh in to say artificial intelligence, boo, woke bullshit, well, that's fine too. And I might even make a video that, engages with your point more deeply than you did in making it, like this one. All right. Well, for some reason, my voice is giving out, so I guess that means it's time to stop recording. I don't post to YouTube much anymore. I've been demonetized yet again, and I'm not even bothering to reapply for monetization. So I have no financial, motivation to post these things. But I know that some of you will not go and seek me out on Substack, and I've lost access to the C-Realm podcast RSS feed. So, I know most of you have not subscribed to the KMO show. I will put a link to it in the show notes for this, not this episode, in the description for this video. And you can subscribe. I do post the occasional podcast there, but most of my effort these days is going into Substack. And again, my Substack is Gen X, science fiction, and futurism with KMO. So, hope to see you there. Hey, dog. Come on. Come on.